cast iron blocks with aluminum heads. Something. It's a whole LS thing. All these little needle bearings wind up, hopefully just in your oil pan. They may wind up in other spots. Hello everyone, welcome back to Maverick Mods. This week, little LS magic. It's time to put the engine transmission back in the Firebird. Got a little bit of maintenance work to do prior to doing that. Nothing major, but let's go through it. So grab your popcorn, here we go. Phase, what are we on? Phase, I'm not sure what phase we're on. Phase 6, sure. The big reveal, the LS1. It's time to get this thing ready to put it in Firebird. For those of you that have been following this build for a while, I'm going to be repeating myself. Those of you that are new to the channel, we've got an LS1 here that came from a 2000 Z28. That was our donor car. There's a ton of stuff that came from that car, but originally it was to get this engine and the T56 6-speed. Turns out we were able to use the torque arm rear suspension and the rear end, and it turns out we're able to use most of the suspension and a lot of the interior from that donor car, so it worked out really well. But we're talking engine today. So briefly, most of you guys know this. I hope all of you know this, but maybe some of you don't. What is an LS1? Well, the LS series engines were the replacement engines for the good old small block Chevy that we all, hopefully all of us, grew up with. It started in 1955, I believe, with the 265, morphed into the 283, the 302, the 327, 350, the 400. I think there was a 307 and several others along the way. That engine series ran with various changes from 1955 until late 90s, maybe into 2000 on a few trucks. But in passenger cars, the LS series came out in 1997 in the Corvette. And then it came out in 98 in the F-body, or in the Camaro and the Firebird. In the LS series engines, which kind of is a big umbrella, not all of the engines are aluminum blocks. Most of the truck motors are cast iron blocks with aluminum heads. It's a whole LS thing. What we've got here is a 5.7, 348 cubic inch aluminum block, aluminum heads. The engine I've got here has 113,000 miles on it, which for an LS essentially it's barely getting started. It's nothing unusual to see these engines go. If you treat them right and if you maintain them right, these engines, they don't need 300,000 miles plus. More than that a lot of times. So I'm not worried about this motor. I've actually run it, so I know it runs. It's nothing wrong with the engine itself. So I'm not going to tear into it to do anything. No rebuild, no major changes, additions. This particular engine has an LS6 intake, headers, and the computer has a tune. I've got the dyno sheet from the previous owner, dynoed at I think it was 380 horsepower at the rear wheels. So quite a bump from stock. I believe stock was 340 horsepower, 325 horsepower, something like that. So not doing anything to the internals on the engine, with the exception of, and I'm going to get flack from the LS swap guys that go to a junkyard and find a truck motor that's got 80 bazillion miles on it, and they dump it into their project and it runs for another 80 bazillion miles. Well, there are a few things on this platform that it's a good idea while you have the engine out to do, just to make sure that it continues to go that next 80 bazillion miles. So what are we going to do to it? Well, we're not doing a whole lot, but all of the LS platform engines have a few things that I get, if you want to call them weak points, you can. They're not really weak points, but you know, if you address them, again, while the engine's sitting on an engine stand, you're just that much farther ahead in the long run. So I'm going to pull the oil pan, and one of the things that is a weak point on this engine is the O-ring for the oil pump pickup tube. So down here, the oil pump is actually right behind the front cover here, whereas on the old style small blocks, it actually was back at the rear of the sump. But the oil pump is actually up here behind the front cover. It's got a pickup down here that the pickup tube just pops in. It's got an O-ring, and then there's a clamp that holds the pickup tube in place. That O-ring can get hard, and you can have basically problems with drawing the oil from the pan. So preemptively, I'm going to drop the pan, replace that O-ring, and there's an aftermarket clip or clamp that you can put in that helps seal that pickup tube better. So I'm going to do that. On the back of the engine, behind the rear cover, back around here, there's a thing called the dumbbell. And the dumbbell has to do with how the priority oiling system on this engine works. And essentially, the oil comes from the pump, back around, goes through the camshaft first, and then down to the mains and the rods. And so the dumbbell is back here behind the rear cover. The seals on that can get old and hard. It's super simple to change. You'll watch me do that. Go ahead and put a rear seal on it while I'm at it. Of course, a new pan gasket. It's going to get a new front seal, just because I'm not too worried about the rest of it. But one of the things I am going to do, pull the valve covers. The early LS engines, and again, the LS guys are going to scream and cry about this, but you know what? This is peace of mind. The early LS engines, and I don't know where the changeover was, but at least the engines that were late 90s, very early 2000s, occasionally would have a problem with shedding the needle bearings in the rocker arm, or the rocker arms. There's an upgrade kit for that. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the bearings in the rocker arm trunnions with the upgrades. So going to do that. Other than that, this engine is going to get it's been cleaned once, but it's going to get another clean as well. And other than that, not really going to do a whole lot to it. It's I'm expecting good things from this motor. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and get these valve covers off. Let's do the trunnion upgrade. Let's pop loose little hose there. This should be, I believe it's an 8mm. It is. Okay. Nice and clean inside. No varnish. That's a good thing. I like that. Looks really nice, really clean inside. No debris. No varnish. This engine has been and was well taken care of. Alright, so I'm going to start off. Let's pop off this would be number 2. Exhaust rocker. Take a look at it. Okay. So what we've got here is I've got a kit. This one is from Summit, and there's a couple of different companies that make these. I've got a kit from Summit that gives you replacement trunnions, replacement bearings, and new clips for the ends of the bearings to replace the pressed in bearing caps and trunnion that come in the stock rocker arms. Stock rocker arms are good rocker arms. I believe they're 1.7 ratio, and the only thing that's different about them is they're roller on the trunnion. They're not roller on the tip, but they're still good rocker arms. In order to install this, you need an installation kit, which again I got from Summit. Other companies make them as well. Let's get that set up in the vise, and we'll work through replacing the bearings in one of these rocker arms. So part of the kit is this little thingy right here. It's got some magnets in it that hold it to the vise. This is what you kind of set your rocker arm up against. Give you a little cap here. Set it on the end. Tighten it up in the vise. And it pushes everything out. Save our cap, because we're going to need that 15 more times. Everything comes apart. Alright, so here's our rocker arm. We definitely want to save that. Here is why I like to replace these. Here's a factory bearing. Of course, it's got a cap on it. But you see how these things are, they all just fell out right there, okay? So if you have any kind of a failure in any part of this, then everything is just, all these little needle bearings wind up, hopefully just in your oil pan. They may wind up in other spots. And that's just pressed in to the ends here. So what the new setup does is it gives you a completely encapsulated roller bearing setup. So you've got less of a chance of the needle bearing, not roller bearing, needle bearing setup. So you've got less of a chance of the needle bearings falling out. They're still going to press in, but when they press in, of course, they're going to be captured on one side of the trunnion, and as the trunnion goes through the body of the rocker arm, on the other side, it's going to have this C-clip that's going to positively lock outside on the rocker arm. So a little bit more peace of mind, and I think a little bit more robust setup than the factory setup. So let's go ahead and get this in and get this assembled, see what it looks like. Step one, everything's clean. So they give you a couple of parts in the installation kit. End cap, you're supposed to slide that over. It only goes on one way because it doesn't fit on that side. Slides that over this, they call it a mandrel. Take a bearing, got a little assembly lube in it, slide the bearing onto the tool, and they've got an alignment sleeve. Slide the sleeve over the tool, and here we take our rocker arm, stick it in our fixture, just like that. Let's go ahead. Press the bearing in, I guess, until it stops. Seems like that ought to work. Go ahead and pull that out. Drop our alignment sleeve out. We've got our first bearing in. So we've got the bearing on the first side. Now we take one of the trunnions. Again, I did lots of assembly lube on this. Insert it into the side that the bearing's in. Take another bearing, another new bearing, and just kind of get it up against the edge there. And they give you a washer. Fits over the end. Same thing. Now we go back in our fixture. Get my hand out of the way. There we go. press it in. Move it, take the washer out, make sure the trunnion rotates freely, which it does. Grab your snap ring pliers with the snap rings. One side, both sides. All right, so we have an upgraded, nice freely moving trunnion, and hopefully a set of needle bearings that will not fall down in the oil pan eventually. Now I need to just repeat this 15 more times. Well, I showed you one rocker arm trunnion bearing replacement, but you don't have to do them individually. You can do them all at once. So I've got the passenger side done. We'll do just a little bit of a time lapse, and I will get basically all of the driver's side bank done in hopefully in record time. Last step, let's torque the rocker stack down. There's kind of an online controversy about torquing these rocker arms. Some guys say you're supposed to torque them, just torque them and go. Other guys say you're supposed to do it just like you would a non-pedestal rocker, whereas these are pedestal rockers. So like the old small block Chevys where you go in the base circle of the cam before you torque the rocker arm. And frankly, these are pedestal rockers. Torque is torque, and you're not going to have enough of a difference with the spring pressure versus the dish regardless. Torque is torque. I'm torquing them all. I am going to spin the motor over 180, recheck them, but let's get them all torqued and then we'll recheck them. All right, I'm going to spin the motor over 180 degrees, recheck them all, get the valve covers back on, and the trunnion upgrade is complete. I'm going to pull the rear cover off, change the rear main seal, and back behind here is that barbell I keep talking about. Let's get this off and take a look at what we're looking, see what we're looking at. Yeah, no, those okay. All right, now let's see if we can find a place to pry. There's one right there. Cover comes off. Looks pretty good inside. It just looks nasty on the outside. And right here is that barbell. If it's not too stuck in there, sometimes you can get it out with it. There we go. It did. Okay. So that thing just comes out. And all this thing does, the factory had to drill a passage to connect another, my understanding, to connect another passage when they first machined the block, and they use this to block off that additional passage in the oiling system. So always a good idea. If you're this far, this thing is like, I don't know, $4, something like that. Just pop a new one in, you're good to go. I've got my mating surface cleaned up. Let's put the new barbell in. Come on, you can make it. There we go. There we go. All right. A little light down there. I did put a little bit of oil on the O-ring there just to help it go in. Got a new rear cover gasket. Let's make sure we get it on the right direction, which would be that way. Just make sure it's right, which it is. All right. All right, I've got a couple of screws to help line this up as I put it in, but also the rear seal has got a, what you call it? I don't even know what you call this thing. As you slide this thing forward, you need to keep this little lip thingy on so that the rear main seal slides over into your crankshaft properly. We'll get everything lined up here. So just make sure everything's lined up right. And then we can slide the cover all the way on. There we go. Don't need that anymore. But that helps the lip of the seal conform to the end of the crank snout as it slides on. So we'll get the rest of these bolts in. There is a little bit of controversy about both the rear cover and the front cover. When do you tighten and torque them? Some guys say you wait until the oil pan goes on, you level and do all kinds of things, use a straight edge, make sure, etc. The problem is that the covers are designed to use the seal to center the cover. So if you torque if you put the oil pan on, you torque the oil pan down, they're going to draw on these bolt areas here, but you're going to pull this entire cover down if it's not torqued into place. I hope that makes sense. So if you do that and you shift this cover a little bit, then you're going to wind up with a leak on the rear main. So the better way to do it, at least my opinion only, is let the seal center the cover, make sure you're level at your oil pan rail, but then torque everything on this cover, and if you're doing the front cover, that as well, before you torque down the oil pan. These guys are going to 18 inch-pounds. Is there a torque sequence? Beats me, but I'm going to do center out just to say I did. Recheck everything. So with the new rear main seal, new barbell, I'm going to go ahead and clean everything back here. We're going to go back on the engine stand and put the oil pump pickup and the oil pan back on, and we'll be done with the engine mods, or done with the engine maintenance, I should say. Pickup tube, remember I pulled this off to change the O-ring. Here's the new O-ring. So we'll go ahead and slide the O-ring on. I will lube this. Slide on there. Third time. There we go. Let's take a look at what I was talking about the other day. The factory pickup tube, of course, slides right in there, and it's got one ear, one tang to hold the pickup tube down. So what I did was I went in and ordered from Summit, and other companies make one. They've got a little bracket here that basically just has two ears, and it's got a little cutout. When it slides on, it just slides over and accounts for the thickness of the ear that's already there to allow you to use both of the mounting holes in the oil pump. So it's an easy upgrade. I think it's an insurance type upgrade. You can't go wrong by using it. Do you need it? Probably not. Is it nice to have? I think so. So let me get the pickup tube in, then we'll continue with putting the oil pan on. When you finally get it in, it goes in easy. Alright, so let's go ahead and slide our piece on, which will go this way. New bolts. torque to 96 inch-pounds. Little nut for the brace here. I bet that's good enough. Torque to factory spec. Okay, I've done kind of what I can see inspection of the inside of the motor. It looks really good. It looks really clean. I'm actually really impressed with the inside of this motor at 113,000 miles. Looks great, and I got no problems putting it back together with nothing else. So, oil pump pickup tube is bolted in and torqued, bolted down. We are ready to button this motor back up. Got a new pan gasket. I could tell it was the original gasket I pulled off because it was pop riveted in from the factory. Let's get a gasket lined up. I did put just a dab of RTV at the corners of the front cover and the rear cover. Probably don't have to on these, but you know, old habits die hard sometimes. When you put the pan bolts back in, there is a difference. These are the rear pan bolts that go through the pan to the rear cover. You notice they're a different size, so the pan bolt torque is not going to be the same as these rear bolts. Go ahead and just get our bolts in, get them started. I'm about to upset another part of the crowd, but you know what? So what? Aluminum wall pan, aluminum block, aluminum heads. Okay, it's been cleaned, and it's been cleaned about as clean as we can get it. But you know what? It looks kind of used industrial. Now, I can't fix the industrial part, but I can fix the used part. So, we're gonna do a little paint. There you go. Scream, scream. Put it in the comments, scream at me. Here's what I'm using, and I love this stuff, and I'll show you why here in just a minute. This is Duplicolor engine paint, and here's what it is. It's actually, if you can see that, it's cast aluminum. This stuff, when it goes on and dries, it looks like brand new aluminum, and it lasts. And to show you, we're going to take a little trip. Okay, we're going to come out to the shop truck. All right. When I put this engine back in, disregard all the South Carolina sand on the valve cover there. When I put this engine back together over 3 years ago, that's that many years plus that much, I cleaned up, sandblasted the intake, and I painted it with that paint. I have not touched it since, and it looks about as pristine as it can be for having sat there for 3 years with absolutely nothing to pretty it up. Let's go back inside and I'll explain what I think makes the difference on using this paint. Ooh, it's humid out today. All right, I gotta clean up. All right. So, aluminum, when it comes out of a casting, generally a sand casting, generally tends to have a very rough-ish texture, and just left the way it is, like they do on the block and the pan and the pan and everything. I don't want to use the word porous because that's not correct, but it acts like the surface is porous. It traps dirt, it traps oil, it traps everything, and over time that's where you get the discoloration and whatnot, and it does permanently discolor the aluminum, and nothing will get that out. So what I do with aluminum parts that I want to leave aluminum colors, I use that cast aluminum paint. It works great, and it lasts, and it looks, when it after the first couple of heat cycles, it loses the shiny appearance, and it basically changes into what it looks like brand new cast aluminum, and it stays that way. Here's my idea as to why. Because the surface of the aluminum is, for lack of a better term, porous. When the paint goes in there, the paint fills in all those irregularities and imperfections and, you know, real rough texture, and it leaves not a smooth texture, but at least a smoother texture. Less likely for dirt to get trapped in those little micropores. Now, if you sandblast aluminum, then that tends to kind of take a lot of that imperfection or a lot of that roughness out. So sandblasting and then painting on top of works great. That's what that intake on the shop truck was. If you can't sandblast the aluminum like this engine block, I'm not going to take it apart to bead blast it, then what do? Go out and get yourself some old-timey Easy Off, the original formula Easy Off oven cleaner. Be careful with it because you don't want to just spray a bunch of oven cleaner on your engine and just let it sit for 3 days, because it's going to attack the aluminum. But the active ingredient, which is hydroxychloric acid, something, there's, I'll have to look it up. I'll put it in the description. The active ingredient in oven cleaner does a really good job of chemically etching the aluminum so you don't have to sand it, because remember, aluminum corrodes. It corrodes. You get aluminum oxide, which is on the surface of the aluminum, and that's what protects it from rusting. So but the hydroxy blah 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 active ingredient in oven cleaner will chemically etch the aluminum so that paint will adhere to it better. You just, and it also gets the dirt off, which is really good. So I do a couple of applications of engine cleaner just to get the grease and the big chunks off. Then we go in and oven cleaner the whole thing, power wash it, etc. until it's clean, and then it's ready for paint, which is where we're at on the LS here. So I'm gonna do the pan, the underneath sides, and probably the bottom part of the block before I flip the engine back over, just because it's easier to get to. Got the engine painted up. I think it looks pretty snazzy. It looks a lot better than it did. Like I said, it's just aluminum paint. That's pretty much it. It's just cast aluminum paint, but it's gonna look a lot better. I know. The valve cover, I should have done body color, etc. The coil packs are gonna sit on top of that. You're gonna see very little of that anyway. And with so much black under the engine bay, I need a little contrasting color. So I think once it's in and once everything's in, I think this is gonna look good. Next up, flywheel, pressure plate clutch, new throwout bearing, new pilot bushing, all that good stuff. About ready to button this up with new plugs. Just to say I did, I checked this a long time ago, but I want you guys to see this. I'm taking my scope, putting it down. Take a look. I hope you can see this. I mean, the cylinder walls are perfect on this. Of course, I can't see the other side, but I mean, the inside of this motor is just, I'm really happy with this. Cross hatching doesn't, I see no signs of glazing. I mean, man, I couldn't ask for a better engine. All right, just showing off a little bit. That's flush, good enough. New pilot bearing in. Flywheel going on. Just line up the holes. And we'll put a little Loctite on the flywheel bolts. Just to say we did. All right, let me look up the torque spec for this and we'll get this torqued and continue on. Torque specs for the flywheel, 3 passes, 15, 37, and 74. Done. The machine shop put an anti-rust coating. And of course I am out of brake cleaner. Alright, found a can. There we go. Quick wipe. Just get that anti-corrosion preventative off of the flywheel. Did got a little few rust spots, but that's not bad. For around here, not bad at all. Next, clutch disc. You know, sometimes they don't tell you what side to put the clutch disc on. Always remember, the narrow side, or the side that's not sticking out, goes toward the flywheel. Battery ran out right as I was holding the heavy-ass pressure plate clutch assembly up in there. You get the gist. So I go ahead and make sure everything's lined up here with our tool. You do have to draw the pressure plate bolts in before you torque them. I usually feel around the edges, just kind of make sure I'm centered first. Just makes it a little easier to get the transmission in. A couple of turns on each bolt generally will lock the flywheel in place so it doesn't shift around anymore. Alright. Leave that in for just a second while I finish tightening these. I'm not torquing them yet. All I'm doing is just drawing the pressure plate up to the flywheel. Now we'll throw some torque on. Each one of these bolts is 52 foot-pounds. There's not really a sequence to them, or there's not a step up to them. All right, that is ready. Basically, the engine is ready to be mated to the transmission. Hey, we're gonna switch over the transmission. All I've got to do in here, other than clean it up a little bit, is replace the throwout bearing. And this one's pretty easy. It is a hydraulic throwout bearing, but to remove the old one, you just compress it. Oh! Turn the transmission. Let's try this again. Compress it, turn it to the left, hear it, kind of feel it click, and it pops right off. There you go. So I got a new one of these. We'll put that in. This one feels kind of rough. It was about due. She's bolted back together and ready to drop in. I've got new motor mounts. Basically everything's done on the engine. We looked at that earlier. Transmission, I didn't really do anything. Of course, got new clutch pressure plate, pilot bushing, throwout bearing installed, and the transmission basically just needed to be made pretty again. I do need to put the wiring harness on because I know that some of the, so like, see, we got the skip shift, what I think is disabled on this here. That's the reverse lockout. That's the vehicle speed sensor. Over here is the, I believe that's a neutral switch, neutral safety switch. Or I think here it's just neutral switch on these. But I need to route the wiring harness around the transmission prior to stabbing the engine, just because some of this is kind of hard to get to once you get it in the car. So next step is it's ready to drop in the Firebird. Well guys, the Firebird is on its way to being an actual car again. It's on its wheels so it can roll. It has brakes, so well, it'll be able to stop soon. It's got an engine and a transmission, so it can motivate itself, or it will, like, soon. So anyway, I've got, like I said, just I'm test fitting a few parts right now. You notice that the coil packs are on. Basically, at this point, I'm just going to hit a piece and part at a time and kind of build out. So I work on the accessories, work on the wiring harness. I still have to get underneath and finish buttoning up the transmission cross member. But she's in. She looks good. I'm pretty happy. That's going to do it for this week, guys. Engine transmission sitting back in the Firebird. It's been a long time coming, and I'm pretty happy. Still got a little bit left to do to finish buttoning things up, obviously. And I've got a big pile of parts on the table behind me. Accessories. I've got a wiring harness to sort out. I still got a lot of work yet to do. But at least progress is happening. Certainly appreciate everybody watching. Big thanks to all you guys for tuning in every week. Oh, gotta say it. Please like, share, subscribe, notify. Yeah, that's it. See you guys next week. Have a great day.